Let me tell you something about duty. It's a cage. And the day my father's mourning period ended, I heard the lock click shut. For everyone. High Priest Felix stood before King Kingsley in the sunlit throne room. His voice was a low, relentless drum. 6 months, Your Majesty. The crown requires stability. A queen must be chosen. The king stared out the window, his silence heavier than any decree. Princess Stella listened from behind a marble column. Her mind raced. This was the moment. Her friend Rita, a noble's daughter, kind and predictable, could be the candidate. This could keep the peace. And, more secretly, it could keep the king's attention far from her own heart, from the village, from Dan. Later, under the guise of visiting the markets, Stella slipped away. Her guard, Andy, loyal to a fault, secured her path. He believed her trips were a princess's whimsy. He never suspected love. The hidden glade was damp with afternoon dew. Dan, the woodcarver, his hands still dusty from his work, pulled her into the shadows. Their embrace was frantic. A stolen thing. Every day feels longer, Stella whispered against his tunic. Dan's smile was tight with worry. This can't last, Stella. It has to, she said, her voice fierce. But doubt, cold and sharp, had already taken root in her chest. Welcome to every single one of you, new faces, and those who've been here since the beginning. Where in the world are you watching from today? This channel is built on stories that hit home, where love battles duty in the shadows. If you're ready for that, make sure you're subscribed. What comes next? You won't want to miss. The royal procession through the village was meant for show. King Kingsley moved through the crowds, a figure of distant grace, until a misplaced stone caused his horse to shy. A bolt of ceremonial silk slipped from a guard's grip, unfurling toward the mud. A woman stepped forward, not with a gasp, but with swift, practical hands. She caught the fabric, folded it with precise movements, and offered it back. Her eyes met the king's. No fear, just a quiet, assessing calm. I'd hate to see the work ruined, she said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the formal silence. This is Mercy, the village head stammered. A tailor. King Kingsley took the silk. Your hands save more than cloth today, Mercy. He noted the intelligence in her gaze, the unflinching posture. Princess Stella, watching from her carriage, felt a chill. Rita was forgotten. This was a complication. Stella's fury was a private, seething thing in her lavish chambers. Her plan was crumbling before it began. Meanwhile, in a windowless room deep in the temple, High Priest Felix met with his council. The king is drawn to the tailor, a hooded figure hissed. Felix steepled his fingers. A commoner is better, more malleable. Once she undergoes the binding, her soul will be tied to the ancestral spirits. And, he added, the words hanging in the incense-thick air, to our guidance. The ritual was the key, the only path to the throne for a commoner. Mercy, in her small workshop, felt a sudden, inexplicable cold. Her friend Lucy, gripping her arm, broke the spell. The palace is a beautiful trap, Lucy warned. Shadows linger in those gilded halls. Mercy shook her head, dismissing the omen. But the king's impressed smile lingered in her mind. A door had opened, and darkness often slips through open doors. I saw him look at her. It wasn't the look he gave my mother. That was a son. This was a spark. But a spark is all it takes to start a wildfire. Or a sacrifice. Stella paced her room. A caged creature. Andy reported the king had requested Mercy's presence at the palace for a private audience. And I knew, in that moment, nothing would be simple again. The cage wasn't just mine anymore. We were all in it. You think you understand tradition? You don't. It's not just rules. It's a living, breathing thing, and it feeds on the most innocent thing it can find: blood. Mercy stood before the royal elders in the greeting hall. She wore a simple, impeccably crafted dress of her own make. King Kingsley watched, a silent pride in his eyes. She answered their questions about governance, about trade, with a tailor's metaphor. A kingdom, like a garment, must be sturdy in its seams but flexible in its fabric. The elders nodded, impressed by her wit and composure. The meeting was a triumph. Stella, forced to observe, smiled thinly. Her plan to promote Rita was ash, but Felix's eyes held a different victory. A commoner had passed the first test. Now came the real one. Felix summoned Mercy to the temple archives. The air smelled of old parchment and dried herbs. "The king favors you," Felix began, his tone benevolent. "To join the royal line is a transcendent journey. The ascension ritual is a sacred bridge between your spirit and the kingdom's ancestral protectors." Mercy listened, a cautious hope blooming. Then Felix unrolled an ancient scroll, pointed to a clause, written in a dark, faded ink: "The blood anchor. For a common soul to be grounded to the royal bloodline, it requires a tether of equal value, a living family member, offered to the ancestors during the ritual." He said it like he was discussing the weather. Mercy's hope curdled into horror. My brother? Zubby? Or a parent? Felix clarified. "The bond must be of blood." Mercy recoiled. Never. She was out of her seat, the parchment looking like a serpent on the table. "This is not duty. This is murder." Felix's benevolent mask didn't slip. "It is the price of elevation, child. Consider it. The king's need is great." Stella intercepted Felix in a shadowed corridor. She saw Mercy flee the temple, face pale with terror. "This is perfect," Stella whispered, her mind scheming. "Her refusal will break my father's heart. Use it. Make her seem unsuitable." Felix bowed his head. "As you wish, princess." But his thoughts were darker. He would break her spirit, not just her prospects. A queen must be pliable. If you're feeling the weight of these choices, you're not alone. Take a minute. Make sure you're subscribed. This story is about to fracture, and you need to see where the pieces fall. The first sign was the maid, Marianne. She was found in the West Wing, clutching stolen jewels, sobbing. "The voices," she babbled. "They told me to take them. They said it would make the whispers stop." Stella was there in an instant. "A clear omen," she declared to any courtier who would listen. "Strange energies follow the commoner's influence. The ancestors are restless." The doubt was planted. In the village, Dan's chisel worked carefully on a small locket of heartwood. Inside, he carved 2 hidden initials, S and D, a secret token, a fragile claim on a love with no future. He knew the risks, but the heart carves its own path. In another part of the palace, Johnson found Rita on a balcony. He got on one knee, not to propose, but to beg. "I was a fool. My pride blinded me." Rita looked at him, her expression as cold as the stone railing. "Pride is a poor excuse for cruelty, Johnson." She turned away. He was left with the hollow echo of his own regret. And in the temple, Felix began his work. He burned herbs in a brazier, chanting low words not found in any public prayer. He wasn't targeting Mercy directly. He was thickening the air around her, making the palace itself reject her. Shadows would lengthen where she walked. Whispers would coil at the edge of hearing. A cold draft would follow her from room to room. The goal was subtle, relentless unease. To make the gilded cage feel like a tomb. Mercy refused. She looked that ancient evil in the eye and said no. I felt a shameful, traitorous thrill. Maybe she was strong enough to break the cage. Or maybe they'd just break her first. That night, Mercy dreamed of her brother Zubby's laughter. It turned into a scream, muffled by temple stones. She woke in her lavish guest chamber, shaking. Alone. Down the hall, Stella held the wooden locket to her chest, dreaming of Dan, while Felix's chants seeped into the palace stones like a poison. We were all sleeping, while the nightmare was already awake and walking the halls. There are two sets of laws. One for them, one for us. And they don't even bother to hide it. They just call it tradition. Pressure mounted on the king. The council murmured about instability. The people whispered about omens. Princess Stella saw her opening. She approached her father in his study, the picture of concerned duty. Father, she said gently, perhaps your heart leads you toward complication, but the kingdom needs certainty. She presented Amaka, daughter of a high noble house, pious, graceful, educated in statecraft. She understands our ways. Stella pressed. She would be a queen of peace. King Kingsley felt the trap of logic closing around him. He agreed to a meeting. The revelation came to Mercy from a gossipy palace maid. Oh, the noble ladies don't have to worry about that part of the ritual, the girl chirped, unaware of the demolition she caused. Their blood is already considered worthy. Only common-born need to. She made a vague, cutting gesture. Mercy stood frozen. The world narrowed to a single brutal truth. Her blood was currency, and it was cheap. She found the king in the training yard. Is it true? Her voice was stripped raw. Amaka is exempt from the blood anchor? Kingsley lowered his sword, his face grim. The law is ancient, Mercy. It sees noble lineage as already bound to the crown. So my brother's life is a fee, Mercy stated, and hers is not. My blood is cheaper. The king reached for her, but she stepped back. You ask me to pay a price he would not demand of her. That is not love. That is procurement. She left him there, torn between a woman he loved and a law that sickened him. In the village, Dan heard the talk. The king's commoner tailor, the potential queen. His blood ran cold for Mercy. He knew the palace's shadows housed more than just courtiers. He delivered a commissioned chair to the castle's lower servants' entrance. His eyes scanned the windows, hoping for a glimpse, fearing what he'd see. This is where the story splits, and every choice has a cost. Don't miss what happens next. Take a moment, hit subscribe. Stella met Dan in the dead of night in the old greenhouse. His worry had hardened into resolve. You have to tell him, Stella. Tell your father about us. This secrecy will strangle us both. Stella's laugh was sharp with panic. You think that would save us? If they know I love a commoner, the law applies to you. The blood anchor clause. They would demand your family, Dan, your mother, your sister, or you. They would tie my soul to the throne with your life. The truth hung between them, monstrous and final. Dan stared at her, the color draining from his face. The palace's darkness had just reached out and touched him. The supernatural attacks intensified. Mercy's tap water tasted of ash. Her reflection in a mirror once seemed to scream silently. Shadows detached from corners, swirling at the edge of vision before vanishing. Andy, the guard, tasked with monitoring the disturbances, grew suspicious. His investigation led him not to Mercy's door, but to the temple wing. Outside Felix's private quarters, he found a discarded cloth. It was stained with a black resin that smelled of grave earth and copper. Dark magic, not mere superstition. He pocketed the evidence, his loyalty to the crown now warring with a growing dread. Elsewhere, a public banquet turned sour. A drunken noble made a crude remark about Rita, calling her a spoiled prospect. Johnson, without a second thought, dumped his goblet of wine over the man's head. The hall fell silent. "Apologize," Johnson said, his voice low and dangerous. The noble stammered a retraction. Rita, watching, felt the ice around her heart crack, just a little. Later, she allowed Johnson to walk her to her chambers. "That was foolish," she said, but her tone lacked its usual chill. "It was necessary," he replied. She didn't shut the door in his face. Dan looked at Stella like he was seeing a ghost. His ghost. I realized then, love in this palace isn't a feeling. It's a weapon, and they hand the handle to your enemies. Stella, desperate to protect Dan, made her choice. She allied with Felix. She would champion Amaka, ensure she became queen. A noble queen meant no blood anchor. It was the only way to keep Dan safe. She walked deeper into the scheming dark to protect her one light. We all become monsters here. The only choice is what we're monstrous for. The worst nightmares aren't the ones you have while you're asleep. They're the ones that walk into your room when you're wide awake, and they speak with the voice of someone you trust. Mercy's nightmare was visceral. She was in the ritual cave, bound in silk. She could only watch as her little brother Zubby, no older than 10, was led to a stone altar. His small hands were tied. He was crying for her. High Priest Felix stood over him, a ceremonial dagger in hand, but his chanting voice was layered with 100 other whispers. Mercy fought her bindings, screaming until her throat tore. The dagger plunged. She woke. The scream was real, echoing in her royal chamber. She was drenched in sweat, the phantom sound of Zubby's whimper still in her ears. It wasn't just a dream. It was a premonition, a warning from her own soul. At first light, she packed a single bag. She was done. She would not be the reason her light-hearted brother became a sacrifice. King Kingsley intercepted her at the stable yard. "Running will not protect him," the king said, his voice ragged from lack of sleep. "If the council sees you as a threat, they will take him anyway to silence the insult." Mercy shook, fury and fear warring within her. "You offer me no path. I am forging one," Kingsley insisted, gripping her shoulders. "I will find another way. I swear it to you." But his eyes held the desperation she'd never seen before. The crown was a weight even he could not easily lift. Felix delivered the final blow to the king's resolve later that day. In the throne room, before the assembled advisors, he spoke of blight. "The southern farms report sterile seed, Your Majesty. Spring rivers run unusually low. The ancestors are not just displeased. They are withdrawing their blessing. The ritual is not merely tradition. It is the keystone of our prosperity. Without a queen bound to them, the kingdom itself will wither." The words were a masterstroke. Personal desire was one thing. The hunger of an entire people was another. Kingsley's promise to Mercy began to feel like a childish fantasy. Stella, seeing her father's shaken will, moved. She invited Amaka for a tour of the royal gardens. She coached her subtly. "My father values quiet strength. He is burdened by the weight of prophecy. Show him you understand that sacrifice for the kingdom is a noble's first duty." Amaka listened, her serene expression never faltering. "The ritual is sacred," Amaka replied. I am prepared to embrace it fully. Stella smiled, her heart a knot of guilt and relief. This was the path of safety. For the kingdom. For Dan. The trap is tightening around every single one of them. Subscribe now. You need to see who makes it out and who gets left behind. Dan was summoned to deliver a carved screen to the Queen's antechamber, a commission from a past era. As he oversaw its placement, he saw Mercy. She stood in an alcove, staring blankly at a tapestry, her posture defeated. He waited until the servants left. "My lady?" he said softly. She turned. She recognized the kindness in his eyes, not just the deference. "You're the woodcarver, Dan." He nodded. "You look unwell." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Would you be well, knowing your love could get your family killed?" The words tumbled out. The blood anchor clause, the nightmare, her terror for Zubby. Dan listened, and a cold, tectonic understanding shifted within him. The law applied to any commoner who loved royalty. If Stella ever declared her love for him, his mother, his sister, they would be on that altar. Stella's secrecy wasn't just about scandal. It was a shield, and his ignorance had been a danger. That evening, when Stella slipped into their glade, Dan was distant. His touch was hesitant. "What's wrong?" Stella asked, fear clutching her. "I saw her. The tailor." "Mercy," Dan said. "She told me of the price. The anchor." He looked at Stella, his eyes full of a new, painful knowledge. "You never told me the exact cost. You let me think it was about status, not slaughter." Stella reached for him. "I was protecting you by staying," Dan said, stepping back. "I am a weapon pointed at my own family. Every time we meet, we risk their lives. I cannot do that, Stella." He turned and walked into the woods, leaving her standing alone in the moonlight. Her greatest fear had happened. She had protected him so fiercely. She had lost him. In the village, Johnson presented Rita with a ring. A simple, honest band. "I will spend my life earning your trust," he vowed. Rita looked at the ring, then at his earnest face. She nodded. "Yes, but we live by my means, and you will never raise your voice to me in anger again." It was not a romantic decree, but a treaty. He agreed, relief washing over him. It was a small, bright moment of normalcy, a world away from the palace's Gothic scheming. Dan walked away from her. He chose his family's life over their love, and it was the only honorable thing he could do. It broke her. It should have broken the whole damn system. But the system doesn't feel pain. Only people do. Stella returned to the palace, hollow. Andy found her weeping in a deserted corridor, but she would not say why. Dan sat in his workshop, staring at the half-finished locket, his hands still. Mercy watched the moon from her window, calculating escape routes for her brother. We were all pulling away, retreating to our isolated fortresses of fear. And that's exactly when the real attack began. A king's love against 1,000 years of law. It's not a fight. It's a surrender. You just get to choose which part of yourself you sacrifice first. King Kingsley formally received Lady Amaka in the state salon. She was a vision of noble elegance. Her discourse on trade tariffs was insightful. Her piety, when she spoke of the ancestors, was unimpeachable. "The binding is a sacred trust," she said, her eyes meeting his without fear. "A queen's soul must be one with the land's spirit. I am ready to submit." Her words were correct. They soothed the anxious council members present. They felt like a balm to a kingdom yearning for stability, and they left Kingsley cold. He thought of Mercy's fiery refusal, her moral revulsion. That fire had warmed him. This placid acceptance felt like a sentence. Mercy was granted one final audience. She stood before him, not as a supplicant, but as an equal in resolve. Abolish the blood anchor, Kingsley. Tear that clause from the scrolls. Or I walk out of this palace today and you will never see me again. Her ultimatum hung in the air, clean and sharp as a blade. Felix, lurking nearby, responded before the king could. The law is the spine of the monarchy, woman. We do not break it for the whims of the heart. Kingsley looked from Mercy's defiant face to Felix's rigid one. The weight of centuries pressed down on him. The law cannot be changed, the king said, the words ash in his mouth. Mercy's face didn't crumple. It solidified. She gave a small, final nod and left. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. Stella, now fully committed to her monstrous bargain, solidified her alliance with Felix. Ensure Amaka is chosen, she instructed him. A noble queen ends this talk of blood anchors for good. She told herself it was for Dan's safety. She buried the guilt under layers of desperate necessity. Andy, however, was digging. Using his guard's authority, he accessed the restricted archive, one level below the temple. He found scrolls Felix had thought hidden. The language was archaic, but the meaning was clear. The binding did tie the queen's soul to the ancestors, but through a secondary, profane linkage to the high priest's will. The ritual wasn't about unity. It was about creating a royal puppet. Andy's blood ran cold. He rolled the evidence tightly, hiding it in his tunic. He had to get to the king. The threads of the plot are pulling taut. Don't look away now. Take a minute. Hit subscribe. The collision is coming. The king, in his grief and frustration, set a date. The royal wedding would be in 1 month's time. He did not publicly name the bride. The council took it as a sign he was accepting Amaka. Felix knew he could not wait for the king's slow surrender. Mercy's defiance was a loose thread. If pulled, it could unravel everything. His council convened in utter secrecy. The commoner must comply, a member hissed. We must secure the anchor. The boy, her brother, Zubby. Once we have him, her choice disappears. Felix nodded. Take him from the village. Use the covered cart. Bring him to the prepared chamber, beneath the ritual cave. She will bend, or he will bleed. Dan, unable to sleep, was walking the outskirts of the village near Mercy's old home. He saw the dark, unmarked cart. He saw 2 men in common clothes, but moving with a soldier's discipline, emerge from the tailor's cottage. A small, struggling shape was muffled between them. Subby. Dan didn't think. He followed, moving like a shadow through the trees. He tracked the cart to the old forest road that wound up toward the sacred cliffs, toward the caves. Stella, seeking Felix to discuss wedding details, overheard part of it. She caught the tail end of his orders outside the temple, alive and unharmed for now. He is leverage, not carrion. She froze. Leverage. A boy. She pieced it together with horrifying speed. Mercy's brother. They were going to kidnap a child. Her scheming had been about laws and safety. Not this. Not bloodshed. This was her fault. She ran, blind with panic, and collided with Andy in the hallway. He steadied her, saw the raw terror on her face. Princess? The dam broke. She confessed in a desperate, choking whisper. I love Dan, the woodcarver. Felix is kidnapping the tailor's brother to force the ritual. I didn't want this, Andy. I swear I didn't. Andy's mind connected the fragments, the stolen evidence in his tunic. Stella's secret, the kidnapping. The plot was in motion. "Stay here," he ordered, but it was useless. "I have to stop it!" Stella cried, and she fled into the night toward the stables. Andy turned on his heel. He had one destination now: the king's chambers. The truth had to come out. All of it. She told him everything. My sister. She broke the one rule that kept her safe, for a chance to stop the horror she helped create. That's the thing about a cage. Sometimes you don't escape it. You just finally decide what's worth tearing your hands apart on the bars for. Dan watched from the tree line as the kidnappers carried the boy into the mouth of the ritual cave. Stella, atop a stolen horse, pounded up the forest road. Andy burst into the king's private quarters, the damning scroll in his hand. King Kingsley was staring at Mercy's empty chair. We were all moving in the dark, but the darkest place was already chosen, and we were all running straight toward it. You hear about moments of truth. They sound clean. They're not. They're violent. They're the sound of the story you've been telling yourself about your life. Shattering. The ritual cave was not a single chamber. It was a warren of tunnels behind the main altar, known only to the priesthood. Dan followed the kidnappers deep into the earth, the air growing cold and thick. He moved by touch and memory of the terrain. In a rough-hewn cell, they threw Zubby inside. The boy was sobbing, trying to be brave. Dan waited until the two guards left to report. He slipped to the cell door. It was barred with a heavy oak beam. "Zubby," he whispered. The boy scrambled to the door. "Who are you?" "A friend of your sister's," Dan said, heaving at the beam. "We have to be quick." The beam started to move. Then, a voice echoed down the tunnel. "The priest is on his way." Footsteps approached. Dan had the beam halfway off. He shoved it the rest of the way, the wood crashing to the stone floor. He pulled Zubby out. "Run that way, to the main cave mouth." But it was too late. Felix stood at the tunnel's junction, flanked by his two men. A torch flickered in his hand, casting monstrous shadows. "The woodcarver," Felix said, sounding amused. "How poetic." Stella burst into the main cave chamber, finding it empty. She heard voices from the tunnels and plunged into the dark. She followed the light. She arrived to see Dan pushing Zubby behind him, facing Felix. "Release them," Stella commanded, her voice echoing with royal authority. She stepped between Dan and the high priest. Felix's benevolent mask was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating smile. "Your love for a commoner is your fatal weakness, princess. Now, he will serve a purpose. If the tailor will not provide an anchor, a commoner who dares love royalty will do just as well. His blood will tie your soul to our control when you are queen." The scope of the plot unveiled itself. It was never just about Kingsley's queen. It was about controlling the next generation. The throne itself. Andy did not wait for protocol. He entered the king's chamber, scroll in hand, and spoke with a guard's blunt urgency. "Sire, the high priest is a traitor. He has kidnapped the boy Zubby to force Mercy's compliance. And Princess Stella is in love with a common woodcarver who is also now in danger. The ritual is a fraud to control the crown." He thrust the scroll into the king's hands. Kingsley's eyes scanned the damning text. Betrayal, personal and political, detonated within him. "Where?" was all he said, his voice deadly quiet. "The ritual cave, sire." Kingsley moved with a fury his guards had never seen. He and a contingent of armed men stormed toward the cliffs. They entered the cave system, the sound of their approach a gathering thunder. They reached the inner chamber. The scene froze. Stella, defiant, shielding Dan and a terrified boy. Felix, turning, his expression shifting from triumph to surprise. "Your Majesty," Felix began. "Silence!" Kingsley roared. His eyes took in his daughter's protective stance, the woodcarver behind her, the crying child. He saw the truth Andy had told him, painted in the grim tableau. "Arrest the high priest and his men for kidnapping and treason." The guards surged forward. Every secret is out in the open now, and the fallout is just beginning. Don't miss the final reckoning. Subscribe now. In the tense quiet of the king's private study later that night, Stella faced her father. The defiance was gone. Only exhaustion and fear remained. "Is it true?" Kingsley asked, his voice hollow. "You love this commoner?" Stella broke. Tears she had held for months spilled over. "His name is Dan. He is good and kind, and he carves beautiful things. And I have lied to everyone, including him, to keep him safe from the very law you uphold." She confessed it, all the glade, the locket, Dan's withdrawal to protect his family. Kingsley listened, his anger warring with a profound grief. "You risked the stability of the crown, your duty." "I risked everything for him," she wept. "Because my duty feels like a slow death." The king looked at his daughter, truly looked at her. He saw not a rebellious princess, but a young woman in a gilded trap, just as he was. His fury softened into a painful understanding. Mercy, once Zubby was safely returned to her arms, had a choice. She could flee the palace forever. She stood before Kingsley as he returned from confronting Stella. "Your law tried to make me a murderer," she stated. "Your priest tried to make me a slave." Kingsley was stripped bare before her. "I know. What would you have me do?" Mercy's demand was clear. "Abolish the blood anchor. Reform the ritual. Remove its poison. Or the crown you love will forever rest on a foundation of innocent blood. And I will have no part of it." It was not an ultimatum from a lover, but a decree from a conscience. Felix, now in the royal dungeon, was stripped of his robes. His arrest sent shockwaves through the council. The public story was kidnapping and conspiracy. The darker truth was sealed in the king's scrolls. Rita and Johnson, in the eye of this storm, were married. It was a simple village ceremony. No ancient laws, no blood, just two people choosing each other. It was a small, defiant flame of normalcy in the encroaching dark. My father looked at Stella crying, and I saw it happen. He didn't see the disobedient princess. He saw his child, trapped in the same cage he built. That's the moment kingdoms actually change. Not in the throne room, in the wreckage of a father's heart. Zubby slept, safe in Mercy's old palace room. Dan was held in a guarded chamber, not as a prisoner, but as a witness. Stella awaited her father's judgment. Numb, King Kingsley sat alone in the silent throne room. The ancient scrolls of law spread before him. A servant entered, timidly. "Sire, the wedding date approaches." The date was set, but the world that had set it was already gone. Reforming a kingdom isn't a speech. It's a surgery. You have to cut out the rotten parts and hope the patient survives the shock. King Kingsley stood on the palace steps at dawn. The entire court, the city elders, and a throng of citizens were assembled below. The sky was a pale, clean slate. He held no scroll. He spoke from the center of a silence he had carved out himself. "People of this kingdom," his voice carried, clear and unadorned. "For generations, the path to the throne has been watered with the blood of the innocent. The blood anchor is not sacred. It is a crime sanctioned by time." He paused, letting the heresy settle. "A crown that requires murder for its strength is a crown of thorns. From this day forward, that clause is dead, torn from our law and burned. A ripple of shock went through the crowd, especially the elders. The ascension ritual will remain as a blessing, a covenant with our ancestors, but not as a chain. Love, he said, his eyes finding mercy in the front, will be our only anchor. He extended his hand toward her. Mercy, the tailor of Oakhaven, has shown the courage of a queen. She has my heart, and with your consent, she will have the crown. The silence held for a breath. Then from the crowd, a cheer began. Not from the nobles, but from the common people. It swelled into a wave of sound. Mercy, tears in her eyes, took the king's hand and ascended the steps to stand beside him. Later, in the throne room, Stella made her own declaration. She stood before her father and Mercy, Dan at her side, their hands clasped. I renounce my royal privileges, she said, her voice steady. All claims to succession. Let me go with him, as a commoner, so no law can touch us. King Kingsley looked at their joined hands, at the woodcarver who stood straight and unflinching. You will not renounce your birthright, the king said, nor will you force the man you love to live in the shadows. Instead, we change the rule. Dan of Oakhaven will be appointed Royal Master Artisan. He will live and work within the palace under the crown's protection. Your union will be recognized, but it will be private. For now, it was not total freedom. It was a fragile, negotiated peace within the gilded walls. But it was a future. Stella nodded, a sob of relief catching in her throat. Dan bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. The reformed ritual was performed at Mercy's coronation. It was held in the temple, but the doors were open, light flooding in. There was no hidden chamber, no knife. Felix's replacement, an older, gentler priestess, spoke of binding oneself to the service of the people, of weaving one's spirit into the tapestry of the kingdom's history. Mercy, in a gown she had tailored herself, pledged her life to her new people. She was crowned Queen Mercy. The title felt not like a possession, but a promise. In a secluded balcony above the coronation hall, Stella and Dan watched. His arm was around her shoulders. Her head rested against him. Below, the court celebrated. They were apart from it, but they were together. For the first time, without immediate fear, it was enough. In the deepest dungeon, Felix sat in silence. The celebrations echoed faintly through the stone like a taunt. He stared at the wall, his lips moving in a soundless, relentless chant. The ancestors will hunger, he whispered finally, the words venomous in the dark. The throne will drown in blood yet. As the last syllable left his lips, the iron-banded door to his cell creaked open, not by a guard. It swung inward on silent hinges. A shadow, longer and deeper than any cast by the torchlight, stretched across the floor. A figure stood in the doorway, features obscured by a deep hood. Its voice was a dry rustle, like pages turning in a forbidden book. The council is not finished, High Priest. Felix looked up. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. This is where we leave them. For now, a new covenant is sworn, but shadows never truly leave a palace. If this story of forbidden love and shattered tradition hit home, then do this for me. Subscribe, like this video, comment below with who you think that figure at Felix's cell is, and stay connected. Because the story? It's never really over. I'll see you in the next tale. He changed the law. My father. With a few sentences, he tried to cut the poison from our history. We stood in the new world he made, but you can still smell the old one, burning. And some things don't burn. The coronation feast lasted into the night. Queen Mercy danced with her king. Rita and Johnson laughed among the villagers who had been invited. On the balcony, Stella and Dan stayed until the music faded, watching, holding on. In the dungeon, the door swung shut again, leaving only darkness and a whisper. We got our happy ending. We built it on the bones of an old, cruel truth. But down in the dark, the bones are still there, and they remember.